in broadcast history. It only took 39 seconds for a guest to go from composed to completely out of control, launching an attack so personal, so cutting, that producers had no choice but to pull the plug live on national television. This is the story of how one interview spiraled into absolute chaos. The morning started like any other at the studio. Michael Strahan sat behind the desk, his usual warm smile ready for another day of conversation and connection with millions of viewers tuning in from across the country. The show had built its reputation on friendly banter, uplifting stories, and the kind of comfortable atmosphere that made America want to start their day, right here, in these chairs, with these voices. Meghan Markle was scheduled as the guest that morning. The appearance had been promoted for weeks. Viewers were promised an intimate conversation, a chance to hear directly from her about recent projects, personal growth, and her perspective on navigating life in the public eye. The producers expected smooth sailing. After all, this was morning television. This was supposed to be easy. The interview began pleasantly enough. Michael opened with his trademark warmth, welcoming her to the show and thanking her for taking the time to sit down. She smiled back, settled into her chair, and the cameras rolled. For the first few minutes, everything proceeded exactly as planned. They discussed her latest venture, a new initiative she was passionate about. Michael asked thoughtful questions. She provided careful answers. The audience at home sipped their coffee and watched two people having what seemed like a perfectly normal conversation. But then something shifted. Michael asked a question about how she balanced her public work with her private life, a standard question that had been asked and answered 1,000 times before on 1,000 different shows. It was the kind of softball inquiry that guests usually welcomed, an opportunity to share something personal without venturing into truly difficult territory. Nothing about the question seemed provocative. Nothing about his tone suggested confrontation. Her expression changed immediately. The smile vanished. Her posture stiffened. She looked at Michael as if he had just committed an unforgivable offense, as if this simple, innocuous question had crossed some invisible line that only she could see. "I find it interesting," she began, her voice taking on an edge that had not been there moments before, "that you would ask me that question. You, of all people, asking me about balance." Michael blinked, clearly caught off guard. He maintained his composure, his smile fading just slightly as he tried to understand what had just happened. "I'm sorry, I don't quite follow. It's just a question about how you manage everything you have going on." She leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You don't follow? Really? Do you ask every guest about their private life, or just the ones you think you can corner?" The studio went quiet. The crew members glanced at each other, uncertain whether this was some kind of scripted moment they had not been informed about. Michael's co-hosts, sitting just off to the side, froze in their seats. This was not in the rundown. This was not supposed to happen. Michael kept his voice steady, professional. "I ask all of my guests about their lives. That's what we do here. We have conversations. I didn't mean anything by it except genuine curiosity." "Genuine curiosity," she repeated, her tone dripping with disdain. "Is that what you call it? Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like an interrogation. It feels like you're trying to make me into some kind of spectacle for your audience." The audience at home was now fully awake, coffee forgotten, eyes glued to their screens. This was not the comfortable morning show they had turned on. This was something else entirely. This was car crash television, the kind you cannot look away from even when you want to. Michael took a breath, his media training kicking in. He had been in difficult interviews before. He knew how to de-escalate. He knew how to steer a conversation back to safe ground. "I can assure you, that's not my intention at all. I have nothing but respect for you and what you've accomplished. If the question made you uncomfortable, I apologize. We can move on." But she was not interested in moving on. If anything, his attempt at diplomacy seemed to fuel her anger. "Respect?" she said, her voice rising. "You want to talk about respect? Let me tell you something about respect, Michael. Respect is not ambushing someone with invasive questions on live television. Respect is not treating your guests like they're here for your entertainment." "I didn't ambush you," Michael replied, his patience beginning to wear thin despite his pace. "Best efforts. You agreed to come on this show. You knew we would be having a conversation. That's the entire point of doing an interview." "A conversation," she said mockingly. "This isn't a conversation. This is you trying to trap me, trying to get me to say something you can turn into a headline. Well, I'm not playing your game." The tension in the studio was suffocating now. Camera operators did not know where to point their lenses. Producers in the control room frantically whispered into their headsets, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that was escalating by the second. Michael's co-hosts looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. Michael straightened in his seat, his voice firm but still controlled. "I'm not trying to trap anyone. I'm doing my job, which is to have genuine conversations with people. If you feel attacked by a simple question about balance, then maybe we need to take a step back and figure out what's really going on here." That was the moment everything exploded. Her face flushed red. She stood up from her chair, the microphone still clipped to her collar, her voice now loud enough that viewers at home instinctively reached for their remote controls to turn down the volume. "What's really going on here?" she shouted, jabbing her finger toward Michael. "Is that you think you can sit there in your comfortable chair with your comfortable job and ask me whatever you want? You think because you smile and act friendly that I'm supposed to just open up and expose myself for your ratings? Well, I won't do it. I won't be your puppet." Michael stood as well, not in aggression, but in an attempt to regain some control over the situation. "Nobody is asking you to be a puppet. Nobody is forcing you to be here. You came on this show of your own free will." "My own free will?" she practically screamed. "Do you have any idea what it's like to be constantly scrutinized, constantly judged, constantly questioned about every single aspect of your life? Do you have any concept of what that feels like?" "Actually," Michael said, his voice still remarkably calm given the circumstances, "I do. I've been in the public eye for decades. I've answered thousands of questions, some fair, some not. But I've never blamed the person asking the question for simply doing their job." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Of course you would say that. Of course you would defend yourself. That's what people like you do. You hide behind your professionalism while tearing other people down." "I haven't torn anyone down," Michael responded, his tone now containing a hint of frustration. "I asked you a basic question. You're the one who turned this into something it never needed to be." The producers made a decision. Through their earpieces, they told Michael to wrap it up, to end the segment, to get her off the air before this got any worse. But before Michael could say anything, she continued her tirade. "You know what your problem is?" she said, pointing at him again. "Your problem is that you think you're better than everyone else. You think because America loves you, because you have this platform, that you can treat people however you want. Well, let me tell you something. You're not as great as you think you are. The show is not as important as you think it is, and frankly, I can't believe I wasted my time coming here to be insulted by someone like you." The studio was completely silent, except for her voice. Every person watching, whether in the room or at home, was in a state of shock. This was unprecedented. This was not how morning television worked. This was not how guests behaved. Michael's jaw tightened. For the first time since the interview began, real anger flashed across his face. But he controlled it, channeling it into words that were measured and direct. "I have not insulted you once during this entire conversation," he said quietly, but firmly. "I have been nothing but respectful and professional from the moment you sat down. The only person who has been insulting anyone here is you. And quite frankly, I think you owe an apology not just to me, but to everyone watching at home who tuned in expecting a civil conversation," she scoffed. "An apology? You want me to apologize? For what? Standing up for myself? For refusing to be talked down to by someone who clearly has no idea what he's doing?" "I've been doing this for years," Michael shot back, his composure finally cracking just slightly. "I know exactly what I'm doing. And what I'm doing right now is trying to salvage an interview that you have single-handedly destroyed with your behavior." "My behavior?" she shrieked. "My behavior? How dare you? How absolutely dare you sit there and criticize me when you're the one who started this whole thing with your invasive, inappropriate questions?" "It was a question about balance," Michael said, his voice rising to match hers. "Balance. That's it. That's all it was. You are the one who chose to interpret it as some kind of attack. You are the one who decided to turn this into a confrontation. I'm not the villain here, no matter how much you want to paint me as one." In the control room, the executive producer made the call. "Cut to commercial. Get her off the set. In this now?" The director nodded, fingers hovering over the buttons that would fade to black. "Roll the pre-recorded advertisements. Give everyone a moment to breathe." But she was not done yet. "You are exactly the villain," she hissed. "You and everyone like you. You sit up here on your pedestals, judging people, asking your questions, pretending to care, when really all you want is drama. All you want is conflict. Well, congratulations, Michael. You got it. You got your drama. I hope you're happy. I hope this is everything you wanted. Michael shook his head slowly, his expression a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. This is not what I wanted. This is not what anyone wanted. This was supposed to be a conversation. That's all. Just a conversation. But you couldn't even manage that, could you? Don't you dare, she said, her voice low and dangerous now. Don't you dare turn this around on me. I came here in good faith. I came here ready to talk, ready to share. And you ruined it. You ruined everything. I ruined it? Michael said incredulously. I ruined it by asking you a question? Do you hear yourself right now? Do you understand how completely irrational you sound? Security had been alerted. Producers were making their way onto the set. The situation had gone from uncomfortable to completely untenable. They needed to end this, and they needed to end it immediately. She saw the producers approaching and seemed to realize, finally, that she had gone too far. But instead of backing down, instead of apologizing or attempting to de-escalate, she doubled down. This is exactly what I'm talking about, she said, gesturing wildly at the approaching staff. The second someone speaks their truth, the second someone refuses to play along with your little game, you shut them down. You silence them. You make them the problem. Nobody is silencing you, Michael said firmly. You have been talking nonstop for the last several minutes. If anything, you've silenced me. You've silenced everyone else in this studio who was trying to have a professional, respectful conversation. One of the producers, a woman who had been with the show for over a decade, stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on the guest's arm. I think we need to take a break, she said softly but firmly. She yanked her arm away. Don't touch me. Don't you dare touch me. She turned back to Michael, her eyes blazing. This is your fault. All of this is your fault, and I want everyone watching to know that. I want them to know what kind of person you really are. Michael took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the brand weight of complete sincerity. What kind of person am I? I'm someone who shows up to work every day trying to do a good job. I'm someone who treats my guests with respect and dignity. I'm someone who asks questions because that's my job, not because I have some secret agenda. And I'm someone who has never, in all my years of doing this, had a guest behave the way you're behaving right now. So if you want America to know what kind of person I am, I'm fine with that. Because I know who I am. I know I've done nothing wrong here. Can you say the same? The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a brief moment, just a flicker of time, something like doubt crossed her face. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced once again by anger and defiance. I don't have to justify myself to you, she spat. I don't have to explain anything to you or anyone else. Then I think we're done here, Michael said simply. The producer took her arm again, more insistently this time. Other staff members had gathered around, creating a kind of human barrier between her and Michael. The director in the control room had already started the countdown to commercial. They were going to black in 10 seconds, whether anyone was ready or not. She looked around at all the faces staring at her, staff members and crew who had witnessed the entire meltdown, who had seen her transformation from composed guest to completely unhinged antagonist. And perhaps for the first time, she seemed to understand that she was not going to win this fight. She was not going to come out of this looking like the victim she was trying so desperately to portray herself as. Fine, she said, her voice still sharp but losing some of its earlier fire. Fine, I'll leave. But I want it on record that I was treated appallingly here today. I was disrespected, I was attacked, and I was forced to defend myself against someone who had no business asking me the questions he asked. Michael did not respond. He simply stood there, watching her, his expression unreadable. He had said everything he needed to say. There was nothing left to add. She turned toward the exit, the producers guiding her away from the set, away from the cameras, away from the stunned crew members who were still processing what they had just witnessed. As she walked, she continued to mutter under her breath, still convinced apparently that she had been wronged, that she had been the victim of some terrible injustice. The commercial break began. The red lights on the cameras went dark, and for a long moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The studio remained frozen in the aftermath of what had just transpired. Michael finally sat back down in his chair, running a hand over his face. His co-hosts approached cautiously, asking if he was okay. He nodded, though he looked shaken. This was not how his morning was supposed to go. This was not the kind of television he wanted to make. In the hallway outside the studio, she was being escorted toward the exit. Her publicist had appeared from somewhere, looking absolutely horrified, already on the phone trying to do damage control for something that could not be controlled. The guest was still talking, still insisting that she had done nothing wrong, that Michael had provoked her, that the show had set her up, but nobody was listening anymore. The staff members who had witnessed the confrontation knew the truth. They had seen the entire thing unfold. They had heard every word, watched every moment. There was no ambiguity here. There was no gray area. She had come onto a morning talk show, been asked a simple question, and proceeded to have a complete meltdown for reasons nobody could fully understand. Back on the set, the commercial break was ending. Michael composed himself, straightened his tie, and prepared to address what had just happened. The cameras came back on. America was watching again. And Michael, ever the professional, looked directly into the lens and spoke with a calmness that belied the chaos of the previous minutes. "Well," he said with a slight, tired smile, "that was unexpected. I want to apologize to all of you watching at home. That is not the kind of interview we planned, and it's certainly not the kind of television we want to present. We always strive to have respectful, meaningful conversations here, and I'm sorry that this particular conversation went the way it did." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I asked a question that I thought was fair and appropriate. I did not expect the reaction it received. And while I understand that everyone has difficult days, everyone has moments where they're not at their best, what you just witnessed went beyond that. It's important to me that you all know that we did nothing to provoke or encourage that kind of behavior. We were simply trying to do our jobs." His co-host chimed in, offering support, changing the subject, helping to move the show forward, because that's what they had to do. The show had to go on. There were other segments planned, other guests scheduled. They could not dwell on this disaster, no matter how much everyone wanted to process what had just occurred. Outside the building, she was being ushered into a waiting car. Photographers who had been stationed outside for routine celebrity shots suddenly found themselves with something far more valuable. They snapped photos of her expression, still angry, still defiant, as she ducked into the vehicle and slammed the door. The car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into morning traffic. Inside the studio, Michael continued with the show, his professionalism never wavering, even as his mind replayed the confrontation over and over. His co-hosts rallied around him. The crew worked double time to make the rest of the broadcast as smooth as possible. And slowly, gradually, the studio began to return to some semblance of normalcy. But everyone knew that what had happened that morning would not be forgotten. The phones in the control room were already ringing off the hook. Social media was exploding. Clips of the confrontation were being uploaded, shared, commented on. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had something to say about what they had just witnessed. Some viewers sided with her, convinced that Michael must have done something off camera to provoke such a reaction. But most people saw it for what it was, a simple question, a massive overreaction. A guest who had come onto a show and proceeded to attack the host for doing his job. The evidence was right there, recorded, undeniable. Michael finished the show with grace, thanked the viewers for sticking with him through an unusual morning, and signed off with his signature warmth. The cameras stopped rolling. He removed his microphone, stood up from the desk, and walked off the set without saying much to anyone. He needed a moment. He needed to process. He needed to understand how a routine morning interview had turned into one of the most bizarre confrontations of his career. In the dressing room that had been assigned to the guest, staff members found her belongings still scattered around. She had left in such a hurry that she had forgotten her bag, her phone charger, a jacket draped over a chair. Someone would have to contact her people to arrange for these items to be returned. But right now, nobody wanted to make that call. Nobody wanted to have any further contact with someone who had just caused so much unnecessary chaos. The executive producers gathered for an emergency meeting. They needed to decide how to handle the fallout. Should they release a statement? Should they say nothing and let the footage speak for itself? Should they reach out to her team to discuss what had happened? These were not easy questions, and there were no clear answers. Michael was called into the meeting. He recounted everything that had happened, everything he had said, everything he had asked. He was questioned about whether there had been any off-camera interactions, any conversations before the interview that might have set the stage for the confrontation. He answered honestly. There had been nothing. They had exchanged pleasantries in the hallway. She had seemed fine. There had been no indication whatsoever that anything was wrong. The consensus was clear. Michael had done nothing inappropriate. He had asked a fair question. He had responded to her attacks with professionalism and restraint. If anything, he had shown remarkable composure in the face of completely unwarranted hostility. The show would stand behind him. They would release a brief statement supporting him and expressing disappointment in how the interview had unfolded. As the day wore on, the story grew bigger. News outlets picked it up. Entertainment websites dissected every moment. Body language experts weighed in. Media commentators offered their analysis. Everyone, it seemed, had something to say about the morning talk show interview that had gone so spectacularly wrong. Through it all, one thing remained constant: the video footage. The undeniable, unedited record of what had actually transpired. And that footage told a very clear story. A host doing his job, a guest losing control, a simple question that somehow triggered an explosion of anger and accusations, a professional trying to maintain order, an antagonist determined to create chaos. Michael went home that evening exhausted. He had done hundreds of interviews over the years. He had talked to celebrities, politicians, athletes, authors, activists. He had navigated difficult conversations, handled controversial topics, asked tough questions when necessary. But he had never experienced anything quite like this. He had never had a guest turn on him so completely, so irrationally, over something so innocuous. He thought about the question he had asked, the question that had started everything. How? Do you balance your public work with your private life? That was it. 10 words. A question he had asked countless times before, to countless other guests. A question that usually led to thoughtful reflections about managing time, setting boundaries, finding moments of peace in a busy world. Never, not once, had it led to this. He wondered if he could have handled it differently, if there was something he could have said or done to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled out of control. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that nothing he could have done would have changed the outcome. She had come onto that set carrying something, some anger or resentment or frustration that had nothing to do with him or his question. He had simply been the unfortunate target of whatever was going on in her head. Meanwhile, her team was in full crisis mode. Publicists, managers, lawyers, all scrambling to figure out how to spin what could not be spun. The footage was everywhere. The reaction was overwhelmingly negative. People were not buying the narrative that she was the victim here. They had watched the interview. They had seen what happened. And they were not impressed. Some of her supporters tried to defend her, claiming that she must have had a good reason for reacting the way she did, that there must have been context the viewers were not seeing. But these defenses fell flat in the face of the actual evidence. The interview had been broadcast live. Nothing had been edited out. Everything that happened in real time, in front of millions of witnesses. The talk show, for its part, moved forward. The next day, Michael was back behind the desk, smiling, greeting viewers, conducting interviews. He did not dwell on what had happened. He did not bring it up unless asked. He simply did his job, the same way he had always done his job, with warmth and professionalism and genuine interest in the people he was talking to. But everyone who worked on that show would remember that morning. They would remember the moment when a routine interview turned into something else entirely. They would remember watching in real time as a guest self-destructed on national television. They would remember Michael's restraint, his composure, his refusal to sink to the level of someone who was attacking him without cause. And most of all, they would remember the lesson that morning taught, that sometimes, no matter how professional you are, no matter how careful you are, no matter how much you try to create a comfortable, respectful environment, things can still go wrong. People can still lash out. Guests can still turn into antagonists. And when that happens, all you can do is maintain your integrity, stand your ground, and let the truth speak for itself. The footage of that interview would live forever in the archives of unexpected television moments. It would be studied in media classes as an example of how to handle a hostile guest. It would be referenced in conversations about celebrity behavior and public meltdowns. It would be a cautionary tale about what happens when someone mistakes a platform for a battleground. But for Michael, it was simply a strange, difficult morning that he would eventually move past. He had been in the business long enough to know that not every day would be perfect. Not every interview would go smoothly. Not every guest would be easy to talk to. That was part of the job. You rolled with the punches. You kept going. You did not let one bad experience define you or derail you. He had asked a simple question. He had done his job. And when faced with an attack that came out of nowhere, he had responded with dignity and strength. That was all anyone could ask for. That was all he had ever tried to do. Be good at his job, treat people with respect, have meaningful conversations. And when someone made that impossible, handle it with grace. The morning that interview aired, millions of people had tuned in expecting just another segment on just another talk show. What they got instead was 39 seconds that turned into several minutes of the most uncomfortable, shocking, and ultimately revealing television they had seen in years. They watched a host try his best to navigate an impossible situation. They watched a guest spiral completely out of control. They watched professionalism meet chaos. And they watched as the difference between the two became crystal clear. That morning proved something important. That you can have all the preparation in the world, all the questions carefully written out, all the segments perfectly planned, and still have everything fall apart because of one person's inability to handle a simple, respectful conversation. It proved that composure matters, that professionalism matters, that how you respond to adversity says everything about who you are. Michael Strahan showed America that morning exactly who he was. A professional, a gentleman, someone who could be attacked unfairly and still maintain his dignity, someone who could be insulted and still take the high road, someone who understood that doing the right thing mattered more than winning an argument or getting the last word. And the guest showed America something too. She showed them what entitlement looks like. What happens when someone expects special treatment and does not receive it? What occurs when a person cannot handle even the mildest form of questioning without interpreting it as a personal attack? She showed them what it looks like when someone self-destructs on national television, burning bridges and damaging their reputation over absolutely nothing.